As they neared the capital, they were met by a group of royal guards. Their leader, a man with a sneer that made Elara's skin crawl, stepped forward. "Princess Elara," he said, his tone dripping with false respect. "The king has requested your presence." Elara's stomach churned. She had been dreading this moment, the inevitable confrontation with her father. She glanced at Lyra, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. "Very well," Elara said, her voice steady. "Take me to him." The throne room was as grand and imposing as ever, its high ceilings and gilded walls a stark reminder of the power her father wielded. King Theron sat on his throne, his expression cold and unyielding. "Elara," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "You've been busy." Elara stepped forward, her chin lifted. "I've been doing what I can to bring peace to the kingdom," she said. "The rebels have agreed to a truce. If we address their grievances, we can end this war." The king's eyes narrowed. "And who gave you the authority to negotiate with traitors?" he demanded. Elara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I did," she said, "because no one else would. Father, this war is tearing the kingdom apart. We need to find a better way." The king stood, his gaze piercing. "You are a child," he said, his voice sharp. "You know nothing of ruling a kingdom. These rebels are nothing more than criminals, and they will be dealt with accordingly." Elara's heart sank. She had hoped her father would listen, that he would see the wisdom in her actions. But now, faced with his cold indifference, she realized how naive she had been. "Father, please," she said, her voice trembling. "If we don't act now, more people will die. Isn't that worth preventing?" The king's expression hardened. "Enough," he said. "You will return to your duties and leave the matters of state to me. Is that clear?" Elara's chest tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, father," she said, her voice barely audible. As she left the throne room, Lyra fell into step beside her. "Are you all right?" Lyra asked, her voice low. Elara shook her head, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "No," she said, "but I will be." Lyra's hand brushed against hers, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of warmth through Elara's chest. "You're stronger than you think," Lyra said. "Don't let him break you." Elara looked at her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for always being there." Lyra's gaze softened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stepped back, her expression once again guarded. "We should get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Elara nodded, though her heart ached at the distance between them. She didn't know how to bridge the gap, how to make Lyra see that she didn't have to face the world alone, but she was determined to try. For now, that was enough. The days that followed Elara's confrontation with her father were a blur of frustration and heartache. King Theron's refusal to acknowledge the truce with Zara left Elara feeling powerless, her efforts to broker peace dismissed as the naive whims of a child. She threw herself into her work, attending council meetings, drafting proposals, and meeting with advisors. But every step forward felt like 2 steps back. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down on her, and the distance between her and Lyra only made it harder to bear. Lyra, for her part, seemed determined to maintain that distance. She was always there, a silent shadow at Elara's side, but her walls were higher than ever. She spoke only when necessary, her tone clipped and professional, and she avoided Elara's gaze whenever their eyes met. It was as if she had retreated into herself, locking away the vulnerability Elara had glimpsed in the forest and the gardens. Elara didn't know how to reach her, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Elara found herself standing on the balcony of her chambers, staring out at the city below. The lights of the capital flickered like stars, a stark contrast to the darkness that seemed to envelop her. She felt lost, adrift in a sea of expectations and responsibilities, and the one person she wanted to turn to was the one person who seemed determined to keep her at arm's length. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Lyra stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You should be resting," she said, her voice low. Elara sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I can't," she said. "Not when there's so much to do." Lyra stepped onto the balcony, her movements slow and deliberate. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said. "You'll burn out if you're not careful." Elara turned to face her heart aching at the concern in Lyra's eyes. "What choice do I have?" she asked. "My father won't listen to me. The council thinks I'm a fool, and the rebels. If we don't act soon, the truce will fall apart. I can't let that happen." Lyra's jaw tightened, and for a moment it looked like she might argue. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "You're not alone in this," she said. "You don't have to carry the weight of the kingdom on your shoulders." Alara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Then why does it feel like I am?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why does it feel like no one else cares?" Lyra stepped closer, her gaze softening. "I care," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "More than you know." Alara's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. She searched Lyra's face, looking for the truth behind her words, but Lyra's expression was guarded, her walls firmly in place. "Then why do you keep pushing me away?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. "Why won't you let me in?" Lyra looked away, her jaw tightening. "Because I can't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because if I let myself care too much, if I let myself feel, I'll lose focus. And I can't afford to do that. Not when your life depends on me." Alara's chest ached at the raw honesty in Lyra's words. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Lyra's arm. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "You don't have to carry the weight of my safety on your shoulders. Let me help you. Let me be there for you." Lyra's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Elara thought she might finally let her walls down. But then Lyra stepped back, her expression hardening. "I can't," she said, her voice cold. "It's not that simple." Alara's heart sank, but before she could respond, the sound of shouting echoed through the castle. Lyra's hand went to her sword, her body tense and ready for action. "Stay here," she said, her tone sharp. "I'll see what's going on." Elara nodded, though her mind was racing. She waited in the balcony, her heart pounding as the sounds of chaos grew louder. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity before Lyra returned, her expression grim. "The rebels have attacked the city," she said. "They're targeting the palace. We need to get you to safety." Alara's stomach churned. "What about my family?" she asked. "Your father and brother are leading the defense," Lyra said. "But we need to move. Now." Elara followed Lyra through the castle, her mind racing. The sounds of battle grew louder with every step, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning wood. They reached a hidden passage, its entrance concealed behind a tapestry, and Lyra ushered Elara inside. "This will take us to the forest," Lyra said. "We'll be safer there." Elara nodded, her heart pounding as they descended the narrow staircase. The passage was dark and damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and mildew. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the silence, until they emerged into the cool night air. The forest was alive with the sounds of battle, the distant clash of steel and the shouts of men filling the air. Lyra led Elara deeper into the trees, her movements swift and sure. They had only gone a short distance when a group of rebels appeared, their swords drawn. Lyra stepped in front of Elara, her blade flashing in the moonlight. "Stay behind me," she said, her voice low. The rebels attacked, their movements swift and brutal. Lyra fought with a ferocity that took Alara's breath away, her sword a blur of motion as she disarmed and incapacitated her opponents. But there were too many of them, and Lyra was outnumbered. One of the rebels broke through her defenses, his blade slicing through her armor and drawing blood. Lyra staggered, her hand going to her side, but she didn't falter. She fought on, her movements growing slower and more labored, until finally the last rebel fell. Elara rushed to her side, her heart pounding with fear. "Lyra!" she cried, her voice trembling. "You're hurt!" Lyra shook her head, though her face was pale and her breathing ragged. "It's nothing," she said. "We need to keep moving." Alara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "You're bleeding," she said. "You need help." Lyra's gaze softened, and for a moment it looked like she might argue. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "There's a safe house nearby," she said. "We can rest there." Elara nodded, her heart aching as she helped Lyra to her feet. They moved slowly through the forest, Lyra leaning on Elara for support. The safe house was a small, hidden cabin, its interior dark and dusty. Elara helped Lyra inside, her hands trembling as she lit a fire and tended to her wound. As she worked, her mind raced. The attack on the city, Lyra's injury, the weight of their responsibilities. It was all too much. But as she looked at Lyra, her heart swelled with a fierce determination. They were in this together, and she wouldn't let Lyra face it alone. The safe house was small and cramped, but it offered a refuge from the chaos outside. Elara worked quickly, her hands steady as she cleaned and bandaged Lyra's wound. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke. Lyra sat on the edge of the cot, her jaw clenched against the pain, her eyes fixed on Elara. "You didn't have to do this," Lyra said, her voice low. "I could have handled it." Elara looked up, her gaze steady. "You're always so quick to push me away," she said. "But you don't have to. I'm here, Lyra. I'm not going anywhere." Lyra's expression softened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she looked away, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Elara finished bandaging the wound and sat back, her heart aching at the distance between them. She didn't know how to bridge the gap, how to make Lyra see that she didn't have to face the world alone. "Why do you do this?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. "Why do you keep shutting me out?" Lyra's jaw tightened, and for a moment, it looked like she might not answer. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Because I'm afraid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because if I let myself care too much, if I let myself feel, I'll lose focus, and I can't afford to do that. Not when your life depends on me." Ilara's chest ached at the raw honesty in Lyra's words. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Lyra's hand. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "You don't have to carry the weight of my safety on your shoulders. Let me help you. Let me be there for you." Lyra's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Elara thought she might finally let her walls down. But then Lyra looked away, her expression hardening. "It's not that simple," she said. "I've spent my entire life protecting others. It's who I am. If I let myself care too much, if I let myself feel, I don't know who I'll be." Elara's heart ached at the vulnerability in Lyra's voice. She reached out, her hand cupping Lyra's cheek, forcing her to meet her gaze. "You'll still be you," she said, her voice steady. "Strong, brave, loyal, but you'll also be loved. And that's not a weakness, Lyra. It's a strength." Lyra's breath caught, her eyes searching Elara's face as if looking for the truth behind her words. And then, slowly, hesitantly, she leaned into Elara's touch, her walls crumbling as she let herself feel the warmth of Elara's hand. "I don't know how to do this," Lyra admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to let someone in." Elara smiled, her heart swelling with love. "You don't have to know," she said. "We'll figure it out together." And then, finally, Lyra let herself fall. She leaned forward, her forehead resting against Elara's, her breath warm against Elara's skin. "I've spent so long trying to protect you," she whispered. "But maybe I need you to protect me too." Elara's heart soared, and she closed the distance between them. her lips brushing against Lyra's in a kiss that was soft and tentative, filled with all the love and longing they had been too afraid to name. Lyra's hands came up to cradle Elara's face, her touch gentle but sure, and for the first time, Elara felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The rebels, emboldened by their attack on the capital, had forced King Theron to the negotiating table. Elara, with Lyra by her side, worked tirelessly to broker a lasting peace. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks and disagreements, moments of doubt and frustration, but they faced it together, their bond stronger than ever. Zara, the rebel leader, proved to be a formidable ally. She and Elara worked closely to address the grievances of the people, implementing reforms that brought hope to a kingdom weary of war. Lyra, though still wary of Zara, respected her dedication and began to see her as a partner rather than an enemy. As the kingdom began to heal, so too did Elara and Lyra. They found moments of peace amidst the chaos, quiet evenings in the gardens, stolen kisses in the library, the simple joy of being together. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun set over the capital, Elara and Lyra stood on the balcony of the palace, their hands intertwined. The city below was alive with light and laughter, a stark contrast to the darkness that had once consumed it. "We did it," Elara said, her voice filled with wonder. "We brought peace to Eredor." Lyra smiled, her gaze warm. "You did it," she said. "I just stood by your side." Elara shook her head, her heart swelling with love. "We did it together," she said, "and we'll face whatever comes next together too." Lyra's smile softened, and she pulled Elara into her arms, her embrace a promise of safety and love. "Always," she whispered. And as they stood there, the stars shining above, and the city alive with hope, Elara knew that they had found something rare and beautiful, a love forged in fire, stronger than any war, brighter than any star.